It's my pleasure to introduce to you Khalil Osiris. At 17 years of age, he went to prison. He served 5 years. He came out of prison, as he will candidly tell you, worse than when he entered. Went back to prison and was sentenced for 75 years. His transformation was in part due to Nelson Mandela. He got an undergraduate and graduate degree. He started writing to Dr. Mandela. They lost touch. He got out of prison in 1999, did work around the country, volunteering as an author, as a writer, and in 2011, fulfilled a promise by going back to South Africa. Went to visit prisons and schools there, and while there decided that would be his work, and went at a grocery store, happened to bump into Dr. Mandela, to which he said, "Makaziwe?" To which she said, "Who wants to know?" He said, "It's Khalil." She said, "Khalil from America in prison? This is over 25 years earlier." She says, "Yes, that Khalil." And from 2011 to today, over the 8 years, he has become one of the most trusted advisors of the Mandela family. He is on the board for the House of Mandela Family Foundation. He has written a number of books. He speaks internationally. He is the CEO and founder of Reflecting Freedom. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Khalil Osiris.
Wow, Rick really did his homework, didn't he? Now you know why those people in public policy become so tedious in detail. Rick, that was absolutely awesome. Amazing. First of all, I just want to say thank you. There are people in the audience that I want to say thank you to personally, but I first have to say to you that I was introduced to President Cost by Hazel Donahue. And she's like my mother here in Jacksonville. And she said, I'm going to talk, we were talking about Nelson Mandela International Day, and she says, I know who I'm going to talk to for you. I said, who? She said, Tim Cost. He's the right person for you to talk to about an ideal as big as this. She didn't give me many details, didn't tell Tim I had been to prison or any of these things. Just a footnote. So Tim, he made a way for me to come and see him. We sat down, sat in his office, and I said, did Hazel tell you much about me? He said, no, not at all. Just said, you're a nice young man. I should talk to you. I said, okay, this is wonderful. No assumptions out front here. And I said, I want to tell you a little bit about this idea that I have for Nelson Mandela International Day. And of course, before all of that, I had found out that he was a baseball rock star here at Jacksonville University, a 9-inning no-hitter. From that point on, I was like, no, this guy, I like this guy. And then we started talking, and about 20 minutes, 25 minutes into the conversation, Tim looked at me and he said, you know, I had no idea what this conversation or this meeting was going to be about, but I am absolutely inspired because Nelson Mandela was also my hero. And then he began to talk about the things that Nelson Mandela did that are not the typical narrative about his life, but why it impacted him personally. And ironically, the same thing had happened for me under very different circumstances. Rick told you that I was in prison. And a lot of times when people hear prison, that's one thing, but 20 years, it's a little much. You can have reason for concern just as a natural citizen, just a normal person. Like, what the hell would you go to prison for 20 years for? And I guess the simple answer is what my father used to say to me, you're a knucklehead, son. You know, you do 2 good things and you do 3 bad things. My father actually never said it was the system that would have me in trouble. My father never said that it was anything external that would get me in the most trouble. all of his comments always suggested to me that there was something that I had power over regarding whether or not I'd find myself in harm's way. I'm mentioning that to you because it took me a long time to get to a place of maturity, emotional and spiritual maturity, to own that. For a number of years, I went from being a happy-go-lucky kid to a very angry and frustrated teenager. And as is common with many teenagers, my anger and frustration turned into delinquency, otherwise known as misbehavior, mischievousness, a kind of recklessness. I like those words like reckless and mischievous because they kind of mask what actually happens. But for me, it was flat out delinquency. And that delinquency matriculated into crime. I tell you this because I want you to understand that there's a process, there's a progression when people find themselves in a really difficult situation. It doesn't just happen instantaneously. And it's very easy to get into the habit of externalizing why we're in the situation that we're in. In other words, it's very easy to blame, to point fingers, to indict. The hard work, the heavy lifting comes when you can look at yourself squarely and identify your complicity in whatever situation it is that you find yourself in. And so at 17, of course, when I was sent to prison for a robbery, being absolutely rebellious, reckless, stupid, when I went to prison, let me just say this. You know, when you're 17, you're a young man, you think you're a man until you meet men. 17-year-old boys really, especially when we have like a little mustache, we become big men. And I made that mistake. Like you, young man. That's right, I'm looking right at you. Look. Legs too long for the chair, you feeling yourself. And so, I found myself in prison. And here's the thing about it. Nothing in my life could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. It was a brutal environment that I had no idea that I'd find myself in one day, given the circumstances of my upbringing. And when I really came face to face with the level of violence that was all around me, I had to make really tough decisions about what kind of person I would become in order to survive. I was not at my best. In fact, I can tell you that I didn't even know what my worst looked like. But those experiences as a young man did not leave me well. The things that I witnessed. And it would be very easy to assume that I would come out a better person. I mean, you know, we send people to prison, we think that this is what you deserve, and consequently, whatever happens there, we don't care. And then those people return to our communities, and we've had no regard for how their life might have been while they were there. Well, mine's ended up for the worse. So by the time I came out, I was actually very wounded and very angry. It's predictable that things would get worse. It's quite predictable. But the thing that made it worse most of all is not the fact of the experience that I had. It was my own interpretation of what it meant. It was my inability to see in it that I was complicitous in creating it. That it didn't just happen by osmosis. That there was a much deeper process at work that had to do with the power of my personal choices. That those choices actually were more powerful than the structures and the systems and all of the things that we typically look at as the explanation for our failures. I'm saying this to you because I want you to know how my transformation came to be. When I found myself on my way back to prison, and let me tell you, this position that what I'm sharing with you now, I'm a former member of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. I was politicized as a young kid. We thought we were going to change the world. We believed it. I am the eternal optimist and idealist and dreamer. My nickname in my family was "He's the Dreamer," which they said derisively, but I actually thought it was quite a compliment. I was stupid enough to dream. And so, having that kind of background and recognizing now I'm on my way back to prison and I've done all these horrible things, no one else was to blame. I wasn't going to prison, as I say to people, I did not go to prison my second incarceration because I had been in the Black Panther Party. I did not go because I had made a mistake, because many of us say, well, they just made a mistake. No, mine wasn't a mistake. Mine was intentional. The things I did were intentional. So by the time of my sentence, there was no one to blame. There was no broken system that was the reason for my incarceration. Did a broken system exist? Yes. Was it the reason for my incarceration? No. Because some of us get so caught up in the excuses and the justifications and all the reasons why someone ends up in prison that we lose sight of the power that the person has themselves. See, the beauty for me in looking at Nelson Mandela's example is that he chose his path. That takes the ultimate type of courage and integrity to choose a difficult path for principles that are bigger than you. Here I am sitting in prison. I was guilty. In fact, I had done more than I was there for. So there was no whining out of my camp. No whining needed. The moment I took responsibility for being there, I was able to seize all of the power that I had given away over my circumstances, because I realized that my choices constructed the situation I found myself in. Consequently, my choices could deconstruct it and reconstruct something different. But I first had to recognize, at an institutional level, prisons are very much like universities. Surprise, surprise. I'm not calling you a warden, Tim. I'm not saying you're the warden, but there is a little of that in the rule. But the reason why I say it's like that prisons are like universities, colleges and universities, is because the primary activity in any prison you go to is the exchange of ideas. That's why we make assumptions about how people will come out of prison. And some of us even predict, oh, they're going to be really bad when they come out. A bunch of prisoners together, all learning from each other. What do you think is going to happen? But it's the exchange of ideas at an institutional level, and the same thing here. It's the exchange of ideas at a university. And so the quality of the ideas, the quality of the dialogue is important. It's essential to have a visionary leader who introduces ideas into the campus and to the body of students, who will regenerate their sense of their own power and genius and efficacy in the world. That's the role of the institution. I took that seriously while I was in prison, and I had a simple philosophy: turn the cell into a classroom and the prison into a university. And let me just say this to you, for some of you who are here who maybe think the prison thing really doesn't apply to you because you've been a really good, upstanding citizen and you've never done anything to break the law and put you in jail, not even drink and drive one time. Here's what I'm going to say. Prison is a metaphor for self-imposed limitations. Self-imposed limitations. Ask yourself, what is it that you've put limits on your life about? What is it that has diminished your genius, your efficacy, your agency to make change in the world? What is it that has held you back from being your best self? I would suggest to you that that's your prison. And what I recognize about prison being a metaphor for self-imposed limitations, the majority of people who are in jail actually will never see the inside of any prison. We simply engage in socially sanctioned, self-imposed limitations. We divide ourselves based on title, on gender. Some of us are so ridiculous, we divide ourselves on the color of our hair. I've seen 50 Shades of Blonde. Don't tell me it doesn't happen. That's why I always jokingly say, if I was white, I'd had blonde hair and blue eyes. That's why I say it. I'd have had to be at the top tier, Tim. But at our age, I'd have been gray. But fortunately, being black, I'm bald. We just wear this now. But here's what I want to say to you. I wrote Dr. Makaziwe Mandela. At that point, she was Mackie. And she was being really invited all over the country to do amazing things. And I said, I'd like to just invite you to the Black House. You've been to the White House, I'd like to invite you to the Black House. No, there's a Black House in America. Some of you didn't know about it. It's called prison. And I said, I'd like to talk to you about your father's life and his impact on me at the bottom of life. And she responded, as Rick said, but she didn't just respond. She responded with compassion. She responded with kindness. She responded in a way that inspired me. It was beyond what I expected. And then I saw the power of her father, his impact on her life, unfold in her relationship with me. We wrote amazing letters. That's the only reason she remembered me 25 years later in South Africa. We had amazing correspondence. And when you hear from her today, I'd just like you to know that this is a person whose kindness goes to the invisible spaces in her life, not just the public spaces. Thank you so much for having me here.